Good day, everyone. This is already our topic on attention, and by the way, it's our module right now, and we're going to tackle about attention. So our outline is the attention and errors in perception. So if you are standing in the midst of the street scene, you'd be absorbing and processing numerous piece of sensory output, and at some point you are only focus, no, you can only focus on one thing. At some point you can only focus your attention to a specific area, and dyan yun papasok yung errors or perception na hindi na tayo makafocus at some point kasi nga ang dami nating pinagtutuunan. So introduction tayo, no? An individual is sensitive to only a limited range of physical energies in the world. By nature, he is selective in the orientation as he has certain limitation. For example, he cannot respond to a radio waves and supersonic vibration of air particles at some point kasi nga maliliit ito nga bagay. So at some point, accordingly, no, limited lang po yung range natin, ang attention natin. May mga bagay talaga tayo sa range natin as humans na kumbaga hindi saklaw ng range natin. So especially in attention. Attention is the term cover all aspects of selective process. Okay? The term set is a specific term referring to factor of processing within the individual and determine what he shall attend. Readiness to respond may be motor set, perceptual set, or mental set. So, accordingly dito, no, pag gumagawa daw yung na-action yung isang tao, nakatipindi daw if, no, there is indeed a readiness aspect talaga. Nare-ready ka na. Okay, naisip mo na gawin mo yon in motor set ba yan? Perceptual set, no? Specific factors processed in the individual, or even a mental set. So in many specific situations in life, our muscles are tuned up and ready to react as soon as there is a stimuli or stimulation. So pag may napansin tayo, our sensory neurons, automatic yan, no? Magre-ready ka agad yung katawan natin. And particularly na yun, yung mga muscles natin mag-react. Yan yung relationship ng biopsychology. Example, meron kang na-feel ng isang bagay. Accordingly nga, example, may natakot ka sa nakita mo to. Accordingly, maybe mag-dilate or lalaki or laliit yung mata mo. Or yung mag-dilate yung pupil ng mata mo. Okay? So, yun yung mangyayari. In motor set, there is an anticipation of sensory experience to come and a readiness to respond when it does come. As a student who is in a hurry to go out waits for the bell in anticipation. When the bell is rung, he stands up and immediately rushes the room. And often, individual assumes a definite readiness to perceive a certain stimulus and stimuli. Perceptual set comes in and increase as a hungry man looking for eating, places, notices restaurant signs better than notices beauty shops. So, depende din sa'yo, no? Kung ano yung nakaka-base yung readiness ng isang tao. Example, kung gutom ka, of course, yung makakatch talaga na attention mo pag gutom yung isang tao is hindi beauty shop or parlors, maybe restaurant or pagkain. Okay, this is one way na dito nagre-react yung motor set natin or mental set pag gutom tayo. Depende sa ano yung sitwasyon natin. Okay? There are numbers of factors that produce readiness to perceive a response. There are temporary factors and motivational conditions that will help an individual's readiness to respond selectively. There are also characteristics to stimuli that produce sets to perceive. So first, ito yung steps or parang cycle pala ng isang attention ng isang tao. First, an intense stimulus is more likely of advertising matters is likely to be noticed than at least not vivid. So, yung mangyayari daw dyan, no? Meron ka talagang manonotice na stimuli or pangyayari sa paligid mo, no? Pag na-sense mo yan. Second, changing stimuli is more likely to be noticed. So, ito yung mga factors, kumbaga characteristics ng stimuli na napapansin natin. Okay? So, isa dyan, mas manonotice daw natin yung intense na stimuli. Kung may ingay dyan, yung pinakamalakas na ingay, yan yung naririnig natin. Yan yung napupush natin nabibigyan natin attention. Next, sabi dito, Changing stimulus is more likely to be noticed than one that does not change. Kung mahilig ka mag-arrange ng mga bagay, tapos may nawala dyan na isa, nag-change ka agad yung itsura, manonotice mo daw yan. Kasi nga raw, changing stimulus is more likely to be noticed than of not. Okay? Most of us have observed that a prickling light is more attention-getting than a steady. So, pagpapasok ka sa isang classroom, tapos dalawang classroom yung papasukan mo, ang isa dyan may flickering light or yung nagkikislap-kislap, mas mapapansin mo daw yung light na nagkikislap-kislap, no? Kumbaga sa mga light na normal lang, okay? Third, repeated stimulus is more likely to be noticed than once repeated. So, yung paulit-ulit na mga pangulit na mga stimulus, napapansin mo rin yon, okay? For instance, one needs to call someone's name several times if a crowd, okay, di ba? May times pag maraming tao, pag tinawag mo yung isang tao one time, siguro hindi niya yan maririnig. Hindi makakatch yung attention niya. Pero, pag pinaulit-ulit mo yun, you repeat that stimulus, no? Yung pagtawag na yan, mapansin ka na rin. And fourth, constructing stimulus is more likely to be attractive. So, yung mga, kumbaga, mas mailaw, okay? Mas mailaw or kumbaga, mas light, no? Mas light. So, example dyan is that black sheep, no, among the flock of whites stand out from the rest. So, mas makikita mo yung maitim na kulay sa maraming puti. So, in dealing with the set of attention, there are certain processes, no, in the nervous system that create organization. So, sabi dito, one of the most general principles of perception is the law of pregnance by Gestalt psychology. This law states that we tend to perceive stimulus as good form, as stimulus conditions permitting. This also refers to the tendency to fill in the gap. So, mas mapapansin mo daw yung gap sa kabuuan or yung isang bagay pag buo siya. Okay? Or mas makakatch doon na attention mo kaysa bagay na mga kulang accordingly here, no? There is this general principle there. And sabi dito, no? Kasi ito kasing Gestalt psychology, Gestalt word, it came from the German term meaning as a whole, no? Okay? Another is the law of proximity, which is state that stimuli which are close together is in space and time tend to perceive as forming a figure. No? Di ba may mga times na yung mga stars, di ba? Sometimes yung mga stars parang naiisip mo parang pumuporma siya ng kahit ano. Sometimes pag makita mo yung clouds sa taas, may mga times na yung clouds nagpuporma ng teddy bear, nagpuporma ng something. And accordingly to the law of proximity, there are stimuli which are close together in space and time tend to be forming a figure. Nagpo-form siya ng figure. Okay? Similar groupings occur in the visual field of object stimuli that are similar near together. So, sabi na rin dito din, yung may mga object din, no, na malapit sa'yo, yun yung mapapansin mo talaga. Okay? Fall into symmetric pattern or continuous form of sequence toward completion. So, may mga ganito, yung mga linear, no, nakalinya talaga, mas mapapansin mo, wow, nakalinya. Plastado, kumbaga, nakapwesto. Yun, may mga ganun din na mga groupings. Mas nakikita natin sila, okay? A simple kind of organization of visual perceptions appears to be figure ground effect. Patterns are recognized as figures against a back figure ground effect. So, sabi dito, no, patterns are recognized figures against the background. So, depende yan sa'yo, especially may tao nakatayo sa isang building, no, both mo daw mapapansin yung figure, tao or yung building. No, ano yung mapapansin mo doon? Yung figure or your building. For example, letter on this page stand out against the background of the page as a whole. 'Di ba? Mas nakikita mo yung letters kumbaga yung sa likod na parang piyase or yung white kasi nga background lang to. Yung meron talagang figure dyan sa background, no? Part of which stand out is called the figure. So, yung part na nakafocus dyan, no, yung part dyan, is yan yung figure. Yung sa likod, mostly kasi pag sinabi kasi natin background from the word itself, sa likodan. Okay? Sa likod siya. Okay? So, yung nasa harapan, yung figure itself, yun yung nakikita mo. Okay? So, the stability of perceived objects depend on the various constancies, shape constancies, size constancy, location constancy, and color of the brightness. Yung sabi ko nga dito, the more contrast, about the color, the more shape. No? So, sometimes talaga pag nare-retain natin yung isang bagay ng attention natin, nalalaman kaagad natin yung shape, size, and even the location itself, no? Okay? So, perceptual constancy. Perceptual constancy is the tendency of the stimulus situation to be perceived in the same way under varying constances. Meron din ganun. Some of the factors accounting for perceptual constancy are constant relationship of the stimulus to the background. May mga ganito, for example, white object, dim light, brighter mouse. Di ba sometimes pag nag-arrange, gumagawa tayo ng backstage, nag-prepare tayo, we make sure that ang background hindi siya hindi siya kumbaga mahalo. No, dapat talaga at some point talaga yung background, no, hindi siya mag-mix sa kumbaga sa background. Okay? Next is the aspect of stimulus situation which are most dependable for object identification are selected as basis of situation. So, stimulus situation, depende rin sa situation mo. Okay? Example, ang daming ingay dyan, disco dyan, or concert. Kung ano ba yung stimulus dyan, depende sa sitwasyon. Okay? Dependable siya. Okay? For instance, there are some pictures in person's face, nose, ito rin yon sometimes, di ba? Dependable perception and undependable pictures that help us recognize an individual. May mga times na ganito. Sometimes, pag nakatalikod yung individual, siguro yung buhok niya, yung nose niya, nalalaman natin, nakakatch agad yung attention natin. Kasi ito yung mga, kumbaga, dependable picture kasi siya eh. No, nakadepende, yan yung ilong niya. Sometimes, pag kilala natin yung isang tao, ito yung buhok niya. Depende. Hindi lang natin kilala yung tao by sa pangalan, kundi pati na rin sa mga characteristic niya nakadepende sa kanya. Okay? Visual depth. No? Sa vision natin, sa retina, no? May mga times na depende parang sa camera ba, no? Parang medyo rough yung picture, ganun. Nalalaman natin yan. Other cues coming from two eyes arise from convergence. Meron din isang point na ganito. May mga individual kasi na nearsighted, farsighted. So, nalalaman natin yung attention natin pag we use the term convergence, meaning yung dalawang mata talaga yung ginagamit, no? So, if near is object, the eyes turn inward and order both to focus. So, parang ganun lang din. Kabaligtaran, katulad din siya, no? Within audition naman, there are comparable effects known as stereoscopic hearing, the location of sound depending on the intensity, time relations. Depende din. Siguro may times na mas narinig natin ng malakas yung malapit na mga sounds, kumbaga sa mga malalayo. There are number of cues for perception depth. There is registering shadow, brightness, parang sa camera with a relative object, near ba siya sa background, no? Depende. There is this cue is called aerial perspective, no? Parang ganun. No? Ano yung aerial perspective dito? Nakadepende. No, term kasi siya to, ito aerial perspective, especially in photography or videography. Linear perspective is one of the familiar signs, no? Yung nakalinya. Yung mga in geometry talaga ba, kumbaga kung sa isang street, palang yung mga bahay dyan nakalinya. No, meron din yan, linear perspective yung tawag dyan. Okay? Another hint of perspective is height, no? Depende sa height, especially if you're talking about buildings or structure, no? Sometimes talaga, height yung, ang taas naman doon, mga ganon. There is an impression of depth. Even regular surface, gradient texture, ito din, grain. Di ba, may mga times na meron tayong bagay. Alam natin yung gano'n siya ka-rough at gano'n siya kakinis. Isa din yan sa mga basihan kung bakit natin nakakatch sila ng attention natin. Light and shadow, no? Help sa dimension ng isang object at napofocus natin siya. Gano'n siya kalapit, near, or opposite direction ba siya, or gano'n. Gestalt perception of principle of psychology. So, Gestalt psychology, no, literally means pattern, but it used to reflect the idea the whole is different from the sum of its parts. No, sabi to dito ni Wertheimer and his assistants Wolfgang Kohler, no, na ma-understand mo yung isang bagay, no, kumpara sa mas ma-understand mo din yung isang bagay as a whole kumpara sa mga sum of its parts lang. Gestalt principle is the figure-ground relationship. According to this principle, we tend to segment our visual into figure and ground. Okay, di ba? Pag nakita tayong tao, sometimes tao siya na nasa beach, sinisegment natin siya. Okay? Ganun natin siya understand. So, example ito, sabi dito, the concept of figure-ground relationship explains why this image can be perceived as either base. So, sinisegment natin siya. Example, ito. Hindi lang natin siya ma-perceive as picture or black and white picture, no? Pwede natin sabihin, no, segmentally, may base dito at meron ding parang muka. Naka-segment, dalawa. Base at saka muka. Another principle for organizing sensory stimuli, meaning to proximity, na the principle asserts that things are close to one another tend to be grouped. No, so ito, di ba? So dito, kasi closer sila, medyo close, kasi things that are close to one another tend to be grouped together. So since ito, magkahiwalay ito na objects, hindi natin sila kumbaga maisip na group or proximate. No? Kasi parang hiwalay, parang tatlong, hindi siya tatlong grupo siya. Ito, isa talaga compact, proximate, kumbaga. Also, another Gestalt principle of proximity suggests that you see a block of dots on the left side and 3 columns. Parang may ganun, parang may columns, no? Parang may column dito na nangyayari. Anyways, similarity, no? According to this principle, things that are alike tend to be grouped together. So parang gano'n, no? Parang alike siya. Parang yung makikita mo na yung kagrupo nito, yung parang khaki color, parang ito. So because they are alike, things to be alike tends to be grouped together. So parang yung blue, of course, parang yung ka-blue yung kagrupo niya. Malalaman ka agad natin because they are alike. When you are looking at tiny arrays of dots, we likely perceive alternating rows of color. We are grouping these dots according to the principle of similarity. And next naman, 2 additional Gestalt principle are the law of continuity or good continuation and closure. The law of continuity suggests that we are more likely to perceive continuous, smooth-flowing lines rather than jog-broken lines. So, parang ito, continuous siya, di ba? No, continuous lines, yung nangyayari. Rather than putol-putol, no? So, masasabi talaga natin that our perception into complete objects rather than series of parts. So, parang wala lang siyang party. It's continuing line or dots. No? Good continuation would suggest that we are more likely to perceive this as 2 overlapping lines rather than 4 lines. Okay, so example, ito na naman. Closure suggests that we will perceive a complete circle or rectangle rather than a segment. So example, pag may nabuo na siyang parang figure, pasok din ito yung figure ground principle na parang may nabuo na siyang figure. So most likely, malalaman, parang circle yan, papatungo. Malay mo, star siya. Okay, so at some point, there is a figure ground na mangyayari dito. Okay? According to Gestalt theories, pattern perception to our ability to discriminate among figures and shapes occur by following the principles described above. Our perception are based on perceptual hypothesis or educated guess that we make while interpreting sensory information. So at some point talaga, we interpret those things by some point guesses. No? So example, niregaluhan ka ng may regalong binigay sa'yo. Pwede mong isipin kung ano yon, you guess. Is it a cell phone? Depende kung ano yung nakita mong figure. And of course, we have here errors or perception. May mga error yung perception natin. Okay? So sometimes there are errors in perception. One is likely to get horrified at seeing child pick up a knife and stab another, only to find that it was just rubber knife. There are situations in which errors in perception have practical life and death consequences. Okay, so summarize ko na lang yun dito, no? So parang ito, no, not everything we sense kasi, no, is similar sa what we perceive. There are times na we sense this as white and black pero iba yung perception natin. So if you're talking about sensation, no, it's how our sensory organ sense something, no? So and versus perception, iba kasi yung meaning ng perception kasi ang meaning ng perception, it's when you sense something and interpret something what you sense. So yung sensation, you just seen or hear or taste or touch something without interpreting it. That's sensation alone. But we are talking about perception. It's talk about, of course, the thing that you sense and giving interpretation to what you sense. Okay, so careful tayo not always sense. No, dapat when we sense something, let's perceive it correctly. Okay, so yun yung mga problema po ng perception natin. Okay?